Okay, so this will be an overview of how to get started building a site using 11ty and publishing it to Netlify. We are going to start, as all projects should start, with creating a repository. We'll call that demo blog and say built with 11ty and Netlify. 11ty uses Node during its build process, so we will add in a Node git ignore and any license is fine with me. What that should give us in a second is a URL we can go grab and clone this project locally. Here I have Visual Studio Code, and we can run, I have the terminal open on this, and we can run git clone and paste in that URL and bring that all down. So let's cd into that folder. Okay, and then let's open up Visual Studio Code. Inside of, we have one open, but we need to open that folder. So let's open the current folder and we use the current window, and it will just flash and we'll get demo blog is what's currently open. We can close this and open up the terminal again. This is going to be installed using npm, so we'll start. This is a brand new repo, so we need to run npm init, and we'll pass in y to just pass yes to all of the flags. And we get a package JSON file. And we also want to npm install. Here we want to install 11ty. We need to include the organization name and then the repository name. And that'll give us 11ty, and we'll take a minute. So while that's going on, let's add a little bit of content, because what 11ty will do is take that content and build it into HTML. We can write content however we want using a lot of different templating languages like Markdown or HTML or Nunjucks. And so let's write an index.markdown file. And if you're not familiar with Markdown, right, we can do titles. So this is a homepage and something like that. Computer is thinking while this happens, so we might be limiting type speed anyway while that's getting up and running. We will allow access, sure. Okay, we can kind of keep typing at the very least. And so Markdown allows us to use some bold text or italics or inline code if we wanted to. There's a whole host of other Markdown commands we can have. And just to get a second file on here to kind of look at during the demo, we'll add another file that's about.markdown. And this will be about the site, and we could do a block quote or something like that. Block quote and go here. All right, the content isn't what we'll focus on yet. So with 11ty installed now, and we actually have a little bit of content in here as well, let's go and actually run 11ty, and the command for that is npx 11ty. Will perform a build, and that build will take anything that's content and output it into a directory that by default is called _site. And we can see that index.html should just be that regular homepage with bold and italics and code. The way that a lot of static site generators work is in the address for something you don't need to include index.html. A lot of hosting providers by default will serve up that file if a actual explicit file path isn't specified. And so the way that we get nice, clean, pretty URLs is the about.markdown file that we created earlier goes inside of an about folder and then is actually just served in an index.html. Everything's in index.html, and then the folder path helps determine what the navigational path in the browser looks like. So this will get served up when we go to about. So we've written those two files. Let's go serve them up as well. Now anything that's inside of the site folder is now static content. Anybody who can host HTML can serve that up. on the local dev environment, we might want to listen for changes, republish it every time, rebuild. And so 11ty has a command for this as well, which is just passing in the serve flag. And it will spin up a local site and listen for changes to anything in this root directory and publish those. So we have localhost 8080. Let's click and open that. And this is our local site. We have my home page, and we can also go to about, and we can get an about. And we don't have any styles or formatting and stuff, but that's a good enough place to get started. We're almost ready to commit this. The last thing that we need to do is, we don't yet know that site. If we go look at what is committable, it will say we want to commit all of these things. We don't want to include the generated content as part of what we're committing. And so if we go back to the git ignore, we can add a section for 11ty, and we're just going to exclude anything that has a underscore site as part of it. So let's go back to here. We shouldn't see those site things anymore, but we will commit that change. And for all these, we'll add npm 11ty and some content. And push all of those changes up. This is basically our minimum viable site, and gives us what we need to go check if we can integrate it with Netlify at this point. So if we hop into GitHub, we should see that push here. That's a good check that everything is sent that we need to. And now let's explore Netlify. We can log in here. If you've logged in before, it will remember some of your credentials. And what we'll do is set new site from Git. Our provider is GitHub. It can go to any Git repository. The first time you click on this, you'll have to do some integration and authorization of GitHub, but after that, then it knows all the repos you have and stuff like that. So let's find this demo in here, and we have demo blog, so we'll pick that. By default, if it detects that you're using a static site generator, if Netlify detects that, then it knows something about what commands 11ty prefers to run when it does a build, and it knows something about the default published directory of a build. So we'll take those defaults. Those are configurable later if we don't want them. And deploy site should get this live. We see some sort of, it's deploying our site. We can see what the build steps are to deploying, and it has to install node, has to install our dependencies and go through that. That should only take another 30 seconds, but while that's running, let's look at our site. And one thing it gives you is this random URL that is guaranteed to be unique for their generation settings, but they also let you just change the site name if you want. And so we'll just call this demo blog. This is across all of Netlify. As long as you find something unique, you can have it. Sweet, so that is available. And if we click on that link, we have our demo blog live, served over HTTPS through Netlify. And if we wanted to go to about, we could go there. Just to get a feel for the beauty of this site generation is, let's go make one change. So on here, this is changes for Netlify. We're making changes to our local Git repo. We're gonna come into here and say Netlify changes, check them in, and push them as soon as that's done. So let's push. And if we go to Netlify and go to deploys, it should say site deploy in progress, that we already know that it's working on something else. And if we come here and just hit the home page a couple different times, pretty soon we'll get the resolution of that build. Let's go check how that deploy is going. If you refresh this. Okay, so that's published, and we should see it here, changes for Netlify. That was a pretty easy way to incorporate those changes into a pipeline and get them pushed live. And Netlify gives you feature branches and can push changes for pull requests. It doesn't have to go immediately to production, but any changes committed to master will then get pushed into this site. Okay, let's do some more stuff locally and make this a little more robust. So if we have 2 pages, the first thing that we're going to want to do after that is get some layout page to merge both of these 2 pages in. And so what we need to do is create a folder, not under site, but under the root directory, and that has to be named includes, and but that's the default folder name. All the defaults are configurable, but convention over configuration doesn't seem to hurt either. And under includes, we can take anything that we want 11ty to have access to during the build process and be able to pull in dynamically. And so inside of this file, we'll just say that there's a default layout, and the layout, the templating engine we'll use to lay that out is Nunjux. You can use a lot of different things with 11ty. Nunjux is kind of a nice simple version of HTML plus some templating constructs, and is kind of simple and powerful enough to do a lot of things, and works pretty well with 11ty, and is a core templating language in their documentation. This name isn't sacred, but we do have to go take that and tell these content files, these Markdown files, to go use that layout when they're rendering stuff. So what we'll say here is we will introduce a YAML front matter, which is pretty common for blogs and stuff like that. It's just 3 hyphens and then a key value pair. And so for that key value pair, we'll say layout and default layout.njk. We need that full file name, but we do not need the path, because the path is 11ty presumes that the only things it's looking for is inside of includes. And we'll add that to both pages here. Default layout is going to take in the content that was produced inside of here, is all bundled up and made available inside of a data value called content. So in Nunjux, the way that we can display data values on the screen is just by putting them inside of double curly braces. And because that Markdown is generating HTML, we also want to say safe in this case, and that which will mean that we can we don't need to sanitize the brackets coming from Markdown. Let's make this into a real kind of HTML page. So we have HTML, and we have a head on here, and we have a body, and this is going to go inside that body. And let's put a big H1 tag and say this is the name of our blog, is VT Code Camp Blog or something like that. Okay, so we should have what we need to inject that content into the page. These should have been reloading as we go. So let's see our local site development and see if we get VT Code Camp Blog, my homepage, and same thing for about, is they should both be using the same template. Oops. About. Okay, sweet. It uses VT Code Camp Blog. One thing we'll do, we can add anything that we want to make available inside of each template, we can put as a key value pair here. So maybe we want to take the title, and this was formerly stored on this page, but maybe we want to find some way to take that content and make it uniform across posts. And so we can take the same thing with here, title, about the site, and put it here and just get rid of it as the top heading file. We'll have to consume that here, and so let's make an H2, and we can, same thing with content, except we don't have to escape it with safe, is we can put the title in here, and that head wants probably a title too, so we can put it the same value there. And if we bop back to here and refresh, we now should get the same information here in H2, but we also get the title piece, so that tells us that it's coming in correctly. Inside of this body, at this point in time, why don't we add some links to go get to each one of these pages? And so let's add a nav bar here, and let's add a list of links that we're going to put inside of here, and we'll add the first one and put an anchor element. And if we just want to go home, the path for that is just a slash, and we'll say that's getting us home. And the second one is going to say about, and that can go about. If we save this and bop back, Now we should see links to home and about, and we can go back and forth between these pages. Let's do a commit, and we're going to say add layout page. And we'll check that in and push it. And if anyone's looking at the production site, that should be available on the production site in a couple seconds. 30 seconds. As our next step, let's take and put a little bit of styling on here, and this will help us introduce a concept of how to pass through some assets and stuff like that. So what styles do we want on here? Let's take and come up with some. So I'd like to at least style these so they don't look like nav items. So let's add some styles here to the nav. Let's make this a little bit bigger so folks can see along. And list style, let's say none. Okay, we got rid of those. And let's put display flex so that everything's inline, and we'll add in as well. We'll say on each one of these list items, let's put a little bit of padding in there. That's a little bit better. Maybe put a background color on this. That looks fine. And on the body, let's put in max width of 40, and let's center that with margin auto. Okay, maybe make that max width of 50. That looks a little better. And for HTML and body, let's just get rid of the margin and the padding. That way things will just glue to the side a little bit more. All right. Our next challenge is, this looks fine in terms of styles. We want to go apply those styles to our page. And we could just inline those styles here, but let's say we want to author those externally and then pull them into here. We're going to need a CSS file, but that site only produces generated content. And so we need to tell eleventy to go pull that content, the CSS file, and put it into here. An easy way to do that is just create a whole separate folder at the root level. We can call it assets. The name isn't sacred. And inside here, we'll put any assets we want eleventy to port over to the site. And inside that, we'll put a style.css. And now we'll paste in all of those changes and save that. We need to tell eleventy that all the content from this assets folder can get moved into site once that site is built. And in order to do that, we will create a new file, and that file name is sacred to eleventy. It's eleventy.js, as we can do any configuration we want into that process, and it will load that configuration. The syntax for this is module.export function, and it takes in an eleventy config, and then we can modify that configuration when that gets called. And to this eleventy config, we'll add a command called add pass through copy, and give it the folder name assets. All that's documented. There's no reason why you need to know that off the top of your head, but that's the command to take that and pass it through. Once we save this, we won't see it show up right away inside of this sites folder. And the reason that is because this eleventy config is only loaded once on startup of this command. So we have to stop the command from running and rerun that site. At that point in time, we should parse through this config and see if everything was wired up correctly. Yes, so we got assets and we got that style in there, which means on our default site, now we can include a link, rel style sheet, and we can say, hey, load up assets and load up styles.css. And what that should do is now serve up those styles as part of our page. Did I save this? Did we get that? Let's go take a look at network and see what it's missing. Assets and styles CSS. It cannot find that. did we call something a little? Yeah, we called it style. Okay. And let's go see if it loads it now. Great. So that's kind of our minimum viable site. There's some styles. You can include as much content as you want. You can link to that content. If you're doing a blog post, when you're templating through stuff, there's a way to see all the collections that you have and take just the top 5 or something if you want the most recent ones, or do a search through those. You can template all of those different views out and make them available in different places. The last thing we'll check is, hey, let's push all these changes live. So we'll add a style sheet and check that and push that once that's committed in. I think an amazing offering and a real dangerous thing is inside of this site folder is dangerous in a good way, maybe for developers who like side projects, is on this overview of site settings. There's a lot of stuff we can configure. It will do some asset optimization. There's a lot of things to poke around with that are awesome on Netlify. One thing we can do on domain management is it's currently available on https demoblog.netlify. If we want to add our own custom domain that says demoblog.com, we can verify if that exists. Maybe it doesn't. Let's say VT demoblog, verify. And if we wanted to, we can register that domain and it will point all the correct stuff to get to the Netlify load balancers, and that Netlify hosts that content. They don't charge an arm and a leg over any other registration costs, and you don't have any hosting costs provided with that. And the single point of reference makes it so easy to get up and started. And I think for our live demo, we'll just prove out that concept that you can register domains that easily. So that's basically our demo of how to get all of this information from into a repository in a committable state that you can push and update onto production. And there's a lot more about 11ty and Netlify to kind of explore as you find use cases for them.